Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So it is an early 8:48 on a Sunday morning. My wife got up to do clothes, and like every other husband on a Sunday morning, when their wife gets up to do clothing or something around the house, they get up and they do the news. They do the news. That's my understanding anyway. So let's see. Let's check my sound. Make sure my sound is nice. Guys, coming up this week, I guess because Sunday is the beginning of a new week, Jordan Sheridan is going to be here on Wednesday at 5 p.m. That is going to be an amazing interview. Definitely stay tuned for that one. Oh, by the way, 5 p.m. Eastern, just so we're clear. I have people, watch from all sorts of time zones. Wikileaks republished what I would consider a bombshell. Now, it's a bombshell in the way that Donna Brazile revealing that the DNC leaks was a bombshell. But it's a bombshell nonetheless because it gets across to the wider public of, oh my God, what these people on the left are saying is right. Do you remember this? When Donald Trump came into office, I was hoping. I didn't vote for him, but he is my president. And I, at the very least, hope he keeps what he's saying, his campaign rhetoric, and being conciliatory towards foreign powers and not getting into this business of regime change. Don't take my word for it. Take Donald Trump's word for it himself, not to mention there's several tweets where he says this.
We'll stop racing to topple foreign, and you understand this, foreign regimes that we know nothing about, that we shouldn't be involved with. Instead, our focus must be on defeating terrorism and destroying ISIS. And we will. Any nation that shares these goals will be our partner in this mission. We won't forget.
Russia shared those goals. Here's the problem with that statement. Any nation, we just want to fight ISIS, we just want to fight terrorism, that's all we want to do. Any nation that shares those goals, you're our allies. Fucking A. Sign up. Sign in, sign in, stranger. You're one of us, if you're willing to do that. I agree with him. If you're willing to do that, sign up. We're arm in arm. I may not fully agree with everything that goes on in your country, but it's none of my business. America first. We're fighting terrorism arm in arm. Russia was with you in that pursuit. Full stop. Russia was with you in that pursuit. Now, here's the thing though. Donald Trump bombed Syria. Donald Trump bombed Syria knowing full well it could have caused a military escalation with Russia. He bombed Syria not having any evidence that Syrians did anything at all. He bombed Syria on the day that the inspectors were supposed to go out and gather evidence, which is somewhat of a curious situation, curious timing of events. He bombed Syria when the Syrian government itself had no reason to release chemical weapons. He bombed Syria even though reports show that the terrorists themselves had access to those chemical weapons and that the terrorists themselves have the most to gain by releasing that chemical weapons. Because up to this point, they've lost. They failed. They lost. They tried to topple the Syrian government and they lost. Bashar al-Assad is still in that seat. Get used to the war with Bashar al-Assad because Russia is backing that government. They lost. Why on earth would Bashar al-Assad gas his own people after he's won the war? What is he getting out of it? Does he just get a hard on for gassing people? And did a gas attack take place at all? How do we know? The United States started bombing the area when these guys were trying to get evidence. Russia said it didn't take place. It's a hoax. Which one is right? You would expect that the investigators who were going to get there would have gotten maybe down to the grit of what was taking place. But again, the curious situation of the bombing by Western powers. It seems like they were trying to prevent the gaining of evidence. That's curious. All of this points to Assad not being the person who did this. He may be a bad guy, say it all you want. That doesn't necessarily mean he gassed his people. And going back beyond the gassing of the people point, let's go back to the prior ones. When the UN inspectors came back from that, they were more inclined to say that this was not Assad, that this was the terrorists. And it's just so happened that we've been backing the terrorists. So when the terrorists point to Assad and say Assad did it, and the United States says, okay, well, Assad did it, and they go bombing, we have a dog in the hunt. We have a dog in the hunt. Let's be honest, we have a dog in the hunt. We don't want Assad in that seat. Our policy has been to change regimes. Wikileaks republished an amazing document today, especially if you hadn't seen the document prior. Take a look at this. Newly translated WikiLeaks Saudi cables overthrow the Syrian regime but play nice with Russia. You don't say. You don't say. Saudi Arabia. Saudi fucking Arabia. Overthrow the Syrian regime but play nice with Russia. And isn't that exactly what's taking place? We don't want to do anything that piss Russia off, but we want you to get Assad out that seat. And that's exactly what the United States foreign policy has been. A lapdog for Israel and Saudi Arabia. That's exactly what it's been. Let's take a read. An internal Saudi government cable sheds new light on its current threats of military escalation in Syria. It is no secret that Saudi Arabia, along with its Gulf and Western allies, has played a direct role in fueling the fires of grinding sectarian conflict that has kept Syria burning for the last 5 years. Mind you, add in that the United States has been supporting terrorists and Saudi Arabia has been supporting terrorists in the region, not to mention Britain. It is also no secret that Russian intervention has radically altered the kingdom's regime change calculus in effect since 2011. But an internal Saudi government cable sheds new light on the kingdom's current threats of military escalation in Syria. Overthrow the regime by all means available. A Wikileaks cable released as part of the Saudi cables in the summer of 2015, now fully translated here for the first time, reveals that Saudis feared most in the early years of the war Russian military intervention in Syrian retaliation. These fears were such that the kingdom directed its media not to oppose Russian figures and to avoid insulting them at the time. Saudi Arabia had further miscalculated that the Russian position of preserving the Assad government would not persist in force. In Saudi's thinking, reflected in the leaked memo, Assad's violent ouster by any means available could be pursued as long as Russia stayed on the sidelines. The following section is categorical in its emphasis on the regime change at all costs, even should the United States vacillate for lack of desire. Understand what they mean. The United States and Saudi Arabia have been working to overthrow that regime. They're making a point that, look, even if the United States quiver over this, maybe somebody gets into power that doesn't necessarily want to do this, we should still do it. We need to make it a priority. Our policy in the United States has dovetailed amazingly well with this. If you think about what we've done in that region of the globe, we have attacked Assad. Mattis said himself, we don't even know if Assad did it, and they still struck Syria illegally last time. Same thing's true this time. With more weapons, mind you, more munitions, more arsenals, in order to prevent the acquisition of evidence. That's my assertion. That's what it looks like. That's what all signs point to. I mean, again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's only one group in this that's facing oblivion, and that's the terrorists. Those are the groups that we've been backing. And those groups that are facing oblivion have all the reason in the world to release some kind of weapon or stage something that looks like a chemical weapons thing in order to get the international community a pretext to get involved. That international community wanting to get involved because that international community is associated with Saudi Arabia and have a dovetail foreign policy. Just so we're clear on who these guys are, Saudi Arabia, the United States protected Saudi Arabia and hid information showing that they were instrumental or at the very least took some part in 9/11. Saudi government allegedly funded a dry run for 9/11. There were certain documents that showed that the people who were associated with this were Saudis. We hid those papers. The government hid those papers for years. Let's keep going. We finally know what Hillary Clinton knew all along. U.S. allies in Saudi Arabia and Qatar are funding ISIS. Understand who these people are. Donald Trump has said he's going out there to fight ISIS, and yet his foreign policy is dovetailed closely with the organization that's associated and supporting ISIS. Hillary Clinton knew it, and Hillary Clinton still took millions of dollars from that government. Why do you think they were giving it to the Clinton Foundation? You think they had this great big heart in this one category, but at the same token are funding ISIS and terrorist organizations throughout the Middle East? What do you think? Which one do you think it is? The Independent did a study, or had a study, was publishing a study showing that the weapons that ISIS were getting their hands on went beyond battlefield usage. Meaning that Saudi Arabia and the United States, at least the study found, were funding these groups. They wanted these groups to take down the Assad government. For all of Donald Trump's protestations, for all of Obama's protestations that they're fighting ISIS. Fact is, the organization that you've associated yourself with is funding ISIS. Congratulations, you're helping terrorists. Just to put a bow on this one real quick. I'm trying to go through these fast because there's a lot of stories I want to do today. At the time, the United States government was not admitting that Saudi Arabia and its Sunni allies were supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda type movements. But in the leaked memo, which says that it draws on Western intelligence, United States intelligence, and sources in the region, there is no ambivalence about who is backing ISIS, which at the time of the writing was butchering and raping Yazidi villagers and slaughtering captured Iraqi and Syrian soldiers. The memo says, "We need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are proving clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIS and other radical groups in the region." This was evidently received wisdom in the upper ranks of the United States government, but was never openly admitted because it was to be held that to antagonize Saudi Arabia, the Gulf monarchs, Turkey, and Pakistan would fatally undermine U.S. power in the Middle East and South Asia. For an extraordinarily long period after 9/11, the United States refused to confront the traditional Sunni allies and thereby ensure that the war on terror would fail decisively 15 years later. Al-Qaeda in its different guises is much stronger than it used to be because shadowy state sponsors, without whom it could not have survived, were given a free pass. It is not as if Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State in the United States foreign policy establishment in general, did not know what was happening. An earlier Wikileaks release of the State Department cable sent under her name in December 2009 states that the Saudi Arabia remains a critical financial supporter base for Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, but Saudi complicity with these movements never became a central political issue in the United States. Why not? The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia donated more than $10 million through a foundation. So did son-in-law, former Ukrainian president, whose government was widely criticized for corruption and the murder of journalists. $10 million. I bet it's because they were such humanitarians. I bet that's what it was. That's totally what it was. Look, my point in this is there's a reason why this is not a big deal. This is a memo that was sent to Tillerson, schooling him on U.S. policy. The May 17 memo reads like a crash course for businessman turned diplomat, and its conclusion offers a starkly realistic vision that the United States should use human rights as a club against its adversaries like Iran, China, and North Korea, while giving a pass to repressive allies like Philippines, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Allies should be treated differently and better than adversaries. Otherwise, we end up with more adversaries than fewer allies, argues the memo, written by Tillerson's influential policy aide. The reason that you don't hear about Saudi Arabia assisting in 9/11, the reason you don't hear Saudi Arabia assisting in terrorism throughout the globe, even though Donald Trump said we're concerned with fighting terrorists and we're going to fight ISIS, and yet his foreign policy dovetails amazingly well with Saudi Arabia. Regime change. Don't even know if they did it. They don't care. Regime change. the United States is a lapdog in many respects for Saudi Arabia and Israeli policy. Do you really want to keep going in this way? I'm asking Trump supporters, the 30-40% of Trump supporters that said, yes, I want that guy in office. The percentage of Trump supporters that says, I don't like us fucking around the globe. Are you happy with this? Are you happy that this is the foreign policy that this president's taken on, dovetailing with an organization that's supporting ISIS, which means in some weird, odd way that in the same way that Hillary Clinton was working with ISIS, Donald Trump is too. Because even under him, we are still supporting Saudi Arabia and the things that they're doing right now. We're saying that what's taking place in Syria is such a major deal that we need to bomb the shit out of them. What about what's taking place in Yemen? Do we need to bomb the shit out of Saudi Arabia to prevent what's taking place in Yemen? I'm making a point that what's being said here is not making sense. Do you really want the United States to shed its blood, to give its treasure, on behalf of a bloodthirsty regime in Saudi Arabia? That's what I'm asking. That is what I'm asking. Let's hear Donald Trump again, just so we're clear on what he was saying. Right here.
We want to strengthen old friendships and seek out new friendships. Rather than a rigid dogma, we're guided by the lessons of history and a desire to promote stability all over, and strength in our land. This destructive cycle of intervention and chaos must finally, folks, come to an end. Come to an end.
What happened to that guy? What happened to that guy? That guy is right now supporting terrorists, trying to undermine the government of Syria with the dovetail of the Saudi policy that has been spreading terrorism throughout that region of the globe. That's what's happening to that guy. If you're sick of that, if you're sick of the United States foreign policy being used as kind of proxy for Saudi Arabia and Israel, both repressive, terroristic regimes, and by I mean repressive, they have an open-air fucking slave market, an open-air ghetto in Israel, and Saudi Arabia is literally murdering Yemenis with this kind of theocratic maniac government itself. We're okay with both. I understand you may be a Trump supporter, but are you tired of the United States foreign policy used in this way? Leveraging the blood of Americans and the treasure of Americans for their pursuits in the Middle East. There is something different. And I say there's something different as just an aside real quick. Look, I'm not a Democrat. Clearly I'm not a Democrat. There are a lot of us that aren't necessarily Democrats, that don't necessarily know what we are. I would make the case to you that you are not necessarily Republicans either. That you guys are something fundamentally different than what those assholes are in Congress. And those people are not representing your interests. And I suspect that part of the reason you went to Donald Trump was because of this message of change, that you wanted something different. I hate to disabuse you of this, but he's not. If there's a wayward Trump supporter that's here, I would say, if you're giving me your ear for any moment, if at the very least we agree on this particular thing, maybe we agree on other things also. And maybe the area of disagreement is not necessarily as robust as we think it is, or as some people think it is. He is not your guy. He is not your guy. Long story short, Saudi Arabia, bombshell, not necessarily bombshell, has been working for regime change in that area of the globe. The United States has been working with Saudi Arabia in this regime change. Saudi Arabia even making the point that says, if the United States, if their hard on goes away, we still need to do this, but don't antagonize Russia. This is policy. This is policy that the United States has gone for. And it makes perfect sense that this is policy that the United States has gone for, because this is exactly what the United States has done. In fact, is the logic that what is being put out doesn't make sense unless this is just a secret policy that these guys have been running to do. So I will leave it at this. Let's see if anyone is here. Oh, some people are here. All right. I have a bunch of these guys, so I'm not going to hold this one. I'm going to keep this one relatively short. But I would have a few coming back up where I'll take questions and comments and everything else. So if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone.